Our next speaker is Dr. Dwayne Hunn. He has a long career as an activist, lobbyist, and leader in various progressive movements. He worked in Pakistan and India with the Peace Corps. He is the executive director of the People's Lobby. He is, from looking at his biographical information, I can see he's a real local activist, working on both international and local issues, including on-the-ground projects such as affordable housing, progressive transportation, and land management. So let's welcome Dr. Wayne Hunn.
What's the correct pronunciation? Okay.
I wish, can you hear me in the back?
Hold the mic close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Close your eyes for a few minutes, or a minute maybe. And when I utter a phrase, just keep in your mind the image that popped up for later. Refugees. Climate disasters 2 weeks after. Warring. America's 600 billionaires. Now, whatever images popped up, I hope these three little pieces of gold that I bring will help address whatever images you had. The three pieces of gold include People's Lobby's American World Service Corps congressional proposal.
Hold the mic up.
American World Service Corps congressional proposal. The non-traditional funding mechanism inside of the congressional proposal. And House Resolution 1807 of 1989. The American World Service Corps congressional proposal would ramp up over 7 years by about 150,000 Americans per year until by the 7th year you had 1 million Americans voluntarily doing peaceful, productive national service in their choice of Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Habitat, Doctors Without Borders, Head Start, Red Cross, International Rescue Committee, Oxfam, Mercy Corps, State Conservation Corps, Homes for the Elderly, Teachers' Aids, etc. So if you were 18 through 70, you could do a year or two of service to your nation. If you did it, you'd get paid kind of like a Peace Corps volunteer gets paid. Plus you'd get a stipend for $150, $200 a month for the months that you served, 1 or 2 years worth. And you'd also get, if you did 2 years of service, you'd get 2 years of community college tuition paid, plus state college tuition for 2 years. So you get a college education, or that amount into vocational or other kind of training education. Or that cash equivalent as a home down payment. Or that cash equivalent into public health, your private health safety health program. Now, what this bill also says is that you can't sunset the legislation. Once it wraps up to 1 million a year, sunset means you can't stop it for 20 years. So over 27 years, about 21 million Americans would have chosen to do peaceful, productive national service at home or abroad. Now, how do you pay for something like that? 21 million Americans, and you're giving them some benefits to boot. Well, what we have in the bill is the traditional tax revenues generators, but we have what we call the non-traditional funding mechanism. How many have read Forbes magazine? Just a few. You know it comes out with an edition, the Forbes 400, the 400 richest American billionaires. The Forbes 600, we would take them, and as Forbes magazine often does, list the name of the person, the wealth that person has, and then we have another column on the public spreadsheet that you could see on the internet to show what that person, he or she, has donated to underwrite these 21 million Americans. And it could cost $600 to $700 million. So $600 to $700 million sounds like a lot of money, but if it saves you one $7 trillion war, you're way ahead. And over 25 years, it would probably save 2 $7 trillion wars. Now, what's the third piece of gold? Third piece of gold is back in the late 1980s, Marin County had a buck trust Mr. Buck died, left his will to Mrs. Buck. They were into oil in a big way. It was a big trust fund, and she was left to do with it what she wanted. She passed away, and in her will it said, whatever you do has to be done in Marin County. Oakland and San Francisco said, a lot more problems in Oakland and San Francisco, and that big trust shouldn't be spent just in pricey, richy Marin County. So they tried to bust the trust, and they asked the public to say, come up with a program that does good for the world but stays inside Marin County. So I proposed we have a model Soviet-U.S. Peace Corps, Soviet-American Peace Corps. And we got World College West to say they would host it, but only the top 3 winners came in. My proposal came in 4th. So I kept pushing at this, and I wrote Congresswoman Boxer, and I got nothing back. I did TV shows, public affairs shows, I went on the radio, I wrote op-eds, the IJ ran a bunch of stuff. Nothing was happening. Finally, I get this letter back from Congresswoman Boxer, and she says, Dwayne, I know you think we've been really slow, but we're going to do this. And it took a little while, and she exchanged a lot of letters, not the letters that you see form printed out, but paragraphs. In fact, she suggested that instead of doing it right from the get-go, 50 Americans trained together, 50 Russians trained together, and my theory was if you did this 20,000, 30,000 times, a generation after doing this, you wouldn't have as many problems with the Russians, and you wouldn't have to rely on Donald Trump meeting with, what's his name? So it moved ahead. It was doing pretty well, and in fact, I went to a meeting of the group that gets the Russians and Americans to exchange culture together. And at the end of it, I went because they had the Deputy Secretary General at the Soviet Consulate on Green Street as the main speaker. So I went, and I'd written to him too and got nothing in response.
Put the mic by your mouth.
Yeah, got nothing in response from the Soviet Consulate. And I go to this meeting, there's 100, 150 people. It's ask question time. And I say, what do you think the Soviets would think of a Soviet-American Peace Corps? And the guy stood up and he goes, you Dwayne Hunn? And I said, I'm Dwayne Hunn. He said, you, no go, stay, we talk, okay? I said, okay. That afternoon, they opened the doors of the Soviet Consulate, which are about this thick, and they're steel. And I met the Soviet Consul General, and then I had a card from Richard Casper, and all it said on the card was his name and FBI in my mailbox. Then he spent 3 or 4 hours with me for my first day at work. I really enjoyed Casper. And as it turned out, the H.R. 1807 was introduced, and it was moving along a little bit, and then Russia fell apart. And Sergei Vyazan, my friend, had to go back to the Soviet Union after 2 FBI agents came in the backyard when we had a barbecue because they couldn't see behind the fence and introduced themselves as people from Children's Garden wondering if you'd like to make a contribution on Sunday. In t-shirts that were well buffed, as the one guy kept looking around for Sergei to make sure something wasn't going on. So those are the 3 pieces of legislation and relations that I think, you know, Abe Lincoln, what's the quote from Abe Lincoln? If you make your enemy your friend, do you do away with an enemy? And that's the essence of H.R. 1807, reintroducing it. I asked Boxer to reintroduce it when she was on her go-away tour. And her staff said, no, she's just selling her book. The other piece is, when you have the World Service Corps, you give an alternative, as Roger was pointing out, to this emphasis on war. You know, I walk down the street, and there's this house that has toys. Pick it up and take whatever you want. And there were soldiers, the kind of soldiers I played with when I was a kid in the canned goods shelf of my mom's house. They make soldiers for you to emulate, but they don't make Peace Corps volunteers for you to emulate. And we don't offer enough ways to build up empathy among our populace. When you thought of dumbed down populace, which was one of the images I wanted you to pop up, think of dumbed down populace right now. If you're not dumbed down by what you see on TV and what you see in our leadership, you're pretty healthy. But you gotta give more options to people, and you gotta build more empathy. And I served 2 years in the slums of Bombay, India, and it did something for my empathy. And I think what the country lacks in a big way is enough empathy from direct involvement in what's going on in the world. And this would help do that. So thank you, and I'm zeroed out.
You're zeroed out.
Questions? Yeah, Daniel.
You might want to put up a link to the Global Nonviolent Peace Force, which is a pacifist army that has been in existence for several years. My friend David Hartsoe was one of the founders. Global Nonviolent Peace Force, wonderful organization. And I wish they'd bump it up to 71 because I'll be 71 in January and we'll be turned out, so otherwise I'd love to join.
Daniel, I will look up that website. Let me mention that you can learn a lot about the American World Service Corps at peopleslobby.us. That's the website. Peopleslobby, all one word, .us. But if you're in cahoots with them, ask them to help get this congressional legislation introduced. What I'd ask you to do is to pester your congresspersons. You know, it doesn't get, you had a do-nothing Congress for 8 or 10 years, and it was tough getting anything moving then, Democratic run and Republican run. Ask them and pester them, because you gotta start planting these images in their head, and then you find out who has enough vision to say, that's not a bad idea, I can win votes with it. What mother would prefer her son to go into the Marine Corps than the Peace Corps? Very few. Fritz?
Is it limited to just those two countries, the U.S. and Russia?
No, the American World Service Corps, since it deals with organizations that already have proven track records, you'd go where Mercy Corps goes, where Peace Corps goes, where the Mercy Ship, which might have 10 more volunteers doing this as part of their service, you go where they go. So one of the reasons I broke it out that way is because the Republicans tend to say, we don't want another new big program. This is not a new big program. This is taking proven programs that are already doing good in the world and giving them more volunteers to help them get more done in an era when climate change is really punching us out. No more questions? Folks in the back?
What's the difference between the present Peace Corps?
I beg your pardon?
What's the difference between the present Peace Corps?
Well, the present Peace Corps is not going to make much of a difference in it. John Kennedy started the Peace Corps and he wanted it to quickly grow to 100,000 and he wanted it within 10 years to be 1 million. Do you know the size of the Peace Corps today? 7,500.
Whoa.
The biggest it ever got, it never got close to 100,000. It got up to around 15,000 when I was in the late 60s.
Wow.
And what it would do for the Peace Corps is suddenly give, and they get a lot of applicants, but they can't take them. Trump wanted to zero out the budget for national service totally. That was his submission for 2019. So it doesn't change the Peace Corps, it makes the Peace Corps bigger, and it probably gets close to the image that Kennedy had in the back of his head when he said, I wanted to quickly grow to 1 million. Then it will be, quote, significant. Yes. Yes.
Just a simple question. I noticed you didn't want to mention Putin's name, which is, I guess, a way of expressing your dislike. But do you think that approach and that feeling and that sentiment is wise when he's calling for us to engage and for detente? Do you think that's that kind of, well, in many of my friends, I see sort of a deep hatred there, which has been implanted by the mainstream media. Is that kind of hatred compatible with love and peace?
Well, actually, to be honest, I hate to answer it this way, but I really went blank on Putin for a minute, that's why I said, what's his name? I don't, you know, I think it's better, in short, I think it's better that 20 or 30,000 Peace Corps volunteers get to know each other rather than just the presidents of both countries. But I really did go blank for a minute, blame it on my brain.
Right, okay.
I guess it's a two-part question. I get the feeling from what you were saying, the word volunteer, this would be a vision of volunteerism among young people, not a mandatory program, or is that what you're beginning to see sort of like, my understanding is in Israel, there's like a mandatory service cycle. That was part one, and of course part two, I can't remember. Go ahead.
Okay, maybe you'll remember after I remember. What was your question?
Your vision is, when you speak of the volume of numbers, I know, part one is this, the volume of numbers you're visualizing, to me, is in essence somewhat of a, not just voluntary to bring those numbers up. And the second one was, is this an exchange where we will have people from other nations equally join our areas where there's need for more nourishment in communities, not physical, spiritual, housing, economic advances, from other countries as an exchange of goodwill?
Yeah. The short answer is yes to both of those.
Yeah.
This was an attempt to, I would be for mandatory national service. But the Democrats said, no way. I mean, even Congressman Lynn Woolsey, who I chatted with many times, said, I'm against mandatory service. I tried to explain to her, she doesn't read very well, that it's not mandatory, but it was the way around that to get to be big enough where it's kind of like mandatory. And that was the whole...
The addendum to the question is that typically in these situations, people that have less economic foundations and support growing up tend to be those that pour into these programs, once again, as we see many other programs that are well-intended.
Yeah. But, you know, that helps. A person from a low-income group is going to get college education out of this, and is going to get experience that builds empathy, that makes them a better human being than the softy down the street that comes from money.
Cultural education cannot be replaced, so I think that is very favorable for many people.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention also that, like, say if you did it, and you didn't need the money or the education, you're already educated, but you've been a baby boomer and you're tired of doing what you're doing, but you want to do something different, and you did that for a year or two, those bonuses at the end that you don't need, you could give to your niece, nephew, or grandson, or
Very
whatever.
good insight. I